Well, it's a good starting point, isn't it? When you're sharing your screen works. So yeah, I am Scott Durow, and I am really, really happy to be here. Thank you so much for asking me. It's great to see some familiar faces in the chat as well. Really nice to see people in these times. I have been around in the Power Platform right from the early days, CRM1. So it's been a real privilege to see it grow up over the years. It's just amazing that we basically had an upgrade path from CRM1 to Dataverse today. I mean, theoretically, I think you could just create a solution and just upgrade it, and you know, all your entities would have new underscore. But apart from that, it's very special to see how things have progressed, and now in this new era of no code, low code, it's just great. You can reach me on Twitter there, or I've got a YouTube channel. I've actually moved to Canada fairly recently in the last 8 months from the UK. So yeah, just getting used to the amazing Canadian, well, the sheer size of it, but you know, oceans and mountains. It's just it's really good. So if you are local to Canada or in North America, hopefully we will be seeing more of each other, which is going to be great. So yeah, I was really pleased to hear Hemant talk about Pro Code, No Code Unite. So there's the hashtag that I started with Sarah Lagerquist. It was actually Scottish Summit 2020, I think it was. And you know, because obviously the marketing engine of Microsoft is big on the low code and no code, but obviously we're all here, we're very much developers, so the Visual Studio, the VS Code, you know, is a key part of that, and PCF is just really no exception to this. You know, PCF is all about being able to work nicely with both sides. You know, it's not about picking sides. You don't have to be no code, low code, or pro code. The great thing about PCF is it works together. It's all about component architecture. So all that stuff that Todd was talking about, just really amazing to hear about how that investment in the convergence and things. So and actually, if you were at MBAS, if you saw MBAS, it's all about fusion teams now. So, you know, pro developers and business users and IT admins all working together, all different sides contributing their special part and to create amazing software. So this talk is called Three Sides to Every Story, which is actually I did a little bit of research. Robert Evans, who directed, amongst other things, The Godfather, I think it was. So I think it was his quote, and I'm not sure if it was originally from him, but he was saying there are three sides to every story: your side, my side, and the truth. And no one is lying. Memories shared serve each differently, which is a very philosophical quote. But actually, to me, growing up in the sort of the 80s and the 90s, the band Extreme had an album called Three Sides to Every Story. So this is something that actually, you know, probably closer to my heart than the director of The Godfather. Yeah, so it was an awesome album of my childhood. And actually, I did have it on vinyl as well. So that was, you know, I was one of those people that, used to enjoy listening to vinyl. But the reason why I was talking about three sides to every story is because fairly recently we've got this public preview of PCF in Portals, because we had it originally in model-driven apps, then it was in Canvas apps, and now it's in Portals. It could have been 4, maybe it will be 4 in the future, I'm not sure, but PCF currently is not available in Dataverse for Teams. That's one thing to manage. If it was available, then it would have made my title of my session not work. So it's quite fine actually. Yeah. So anyways, it's 3 sides. 4 sides is not something that we're going to talk about. But this was a really hard session because I have this really bad habit of picking session titles that I know I couldn't deliver now and I have to do lots of work on. It's one of the things I do to sort of push myself into doing things and really understand something. Because, you know, they say if you want to know if you understand something, try and explain it to other people, right? So that's what I did with this, is that I knew that the Portals preview had come out, and one of the things about PCF is that there is this ideology that we want to be able to build components that work across all the different hosts. You know, we want to be able to build a single component. And I think Todd and maybe it was Kushik, mentioned that, that is the ideal. That's really the end game, being able to create a single code base and it work no matter where you use it. And so really, I in my job, I do a lot of development of PCF controls, and I do development for model driven and Canvas, even though Canvas is not GA yet. And portals obviously is one of those things that's often needs to be extended, and typically you end up doing that with custom JavaScript inside your web templates, using something like either React or usually it ends up being something like Angular. But obviously the need to extend your apps is a common across all three of those different hosts, and PCF is theoretically the answer to that. But rather than being able to have to develop separate components for each of those, the ideal is to develop one component. So the purpose of this session was very much about, okay, what do I know at the moment about those three different hosts and what works and what doesn't work? And so what I'm trying to do in this session is give you a high-level overview of the things that you need to watch out for. And what was really interesting, certainly in that Q&A session and in Hemant's keynote, was talking about the investment in this area. So the story so far, because this is a journey we're all on. PCF is a journey. And so the story so far, or I remember when, because I remember when we were actually sitting in a room in the Microsoft campus on a MVP summit, and I can't actually remember who it was now, which is a bit embarrassing, but it was someone who announced the fact that we were going to be able to extend model-driven apps using custom controls. And this is something that we've been asking for ages and ages and ages, because it was like web resources. When you create a web resource, you're on your own. It's just this kind of iframe that you can't break out of, very difficult to extend. And then there was announcements like, we're going to be able to have these custom controls. And literally, I kid you not, there was a round of applause in the room. Because it was something that we really, really wanted to be able to have, something that we could create controls as good as the first party. Does that make sense? Yeah. Web resources always feel like you're on the back foot. You always feel like you're doing something that's not really as good as the first party stuff, the stuff that's being built into model driven apps. So actually, you can see even now the fact that when you try and add a PCF control to a Canvas app, you get this little this may contain unsafe code, because PCF in model doesn't consider it to be unsafe code. You could just add it in and it's fine because it was built for model. For Canvas, it's like, ooh, hang on a minute, there's some stuff external here. By the way, I added the little skull there. But actually, in Matt's keynote, he did actually show this like a new dialogue that's coming, which I cheekily took a screenshot of. So it kind of gives you a little bit more interest and more information about the custom code, so you can kind of go and look at it. But yeah, I mean, the point is that the whole infrastructure was very much filling that need to replace the web resources, and so then when we had Canvas apps, it was like, okay, well now you can add it into Canvas apps. But the idea was that what we want really is a unified control mechanism across all of these different hosts, and so obviously model driven and Canvas apps, and now we have portals, which is awesome. So it really does show this commitment to using PCF as the primary mechanism to enhance the user interface. And what's really exciting now is this app convergence that we're seeing, and certainly Todd was talking about earlier in Hemant, and Kushik was in his intros was also talking about the investment there, is that the custom page mechanism, where we don't necessarily want to worry about whether or not it's model or Canvas, we can still just use PCF. So everything is about this making it easier. Now, obviously, one of the challenges is that in model-driven apps, when you're creating a PCF, you want it to kind of look like a model-driven app. You want it to be, as far as the user's concerned, you want it to look seamless, rather than like on the left-hand side here, we're seeing like an old web resource iframe. On the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, it just kind of doesn't, you can't have pop-ups. It's all constrained within that box. On the right hand side, you can have pop-ups, you can have things. It's all styled using Fluent UI to make it look like model-driven apps. So that's one of the first issues is that we find is that we have to make it look like the native app container. Now, of course, that's the first thing we run into, is that if you're going to now use your control in other containers, then you've got a bit of a theming issue. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Actually, when Canvas apps first supported PCF, I did this cheeky little demonstration where you could just run JavaScript inside a Canvas app, and it got lots of bad reactions. Everyone was like, no, don't do that. And I was like, yes, no, don't you do that. But recently, I don't know if you saw it, I'll put a link at the end. I did a Channel 9 session where with Greg, when I was showing using a Canvas app drag and drop component. And so this is a good example of extending Canvas apps. But of course, the user interface in Canvas apps, you don't want it to look specific. You know, the whole very purpose of Canvas apps, you want to make it pixel perfect. You can just make it look however you want. So that's a challenge, right? You know, how do we make a component that's going to work across all these different hosts and be aware of the host, so that the user interface is going to look native to that particular host. Now, we've got portals. It's kind of, giving us in even more of a challenge there. Now, if you've got a really simple component, and actually this is the slider component that's the sample in the docs, maybe that's not so much of a bigger deal because it's quite a simple component. It's just using some very basic styling. But as soon as you want to do something more complex, well, there we have a challenge, right? Because you're going to have to make it look typically styled with something that's going to work with Bootstrap, because Portals tends to use Bootstrap to do all of the styling. So, there's a significant challenge here. So hence you can see why I started to kind of spin in my mind. It's like, oh man, how are we going to do this? How are we possibly going to have a single component that's going to work across all these things? Unless it's something just really simple, like showing a text field. But the thing here is obviously Canvas app for Portals PCF in Portals and Canvas is not GA yet. So this is a journey that we're going on, and I think it was really great to hear from the PCF team earlier, the thought process that they're going on to actually, go through all of these challenges. And so, if you look at the docs, the Canvas apps in the Canvas PCF in Canvas is still not GA, and we don't have a date on it yet. I hear rumors of it being soon. Equally with Power Apps in PCF in Portals, again, we don't have a GA yet on that. So we're left with this challenge, right? We've got these 3 different hosts, the same framework, but the requirements that we have on those components can be quite different. So that's really where I'm concentrating my mindset on. It's like, how do we think about this? What's our ethos when it comes to building these components across these different hosts? The thing is obviously this is about, and this is one of my favorite phrases of all time, is progress over perfection. It's about moving forwards and being able to respond to the things that we learn. Like agile development is a classic example of that, is that, it's not about kind of going in, locking yourself into a room and then the PCF team kind of coming and doing all the work and then ta-da, here we go, we've got all this stuff. It's about putting it out there and then getting the feedback from us and then and iterating forwards. And so we're on the journey. And this is what I really absolutely love about PCF. And it feels different to a lot of other areas, especially in the Power Platform. It feels we feel like a lot closer to the team in terms of those iterations and a lot closer to them as they solve the challenges. And so I don't know, actually progress using a mobile phone. This picture it's really made me laugh, but I'm not sure if using a mobile phone is really that much of a progress. But especially because he's hunched over. That's classic of me walking along the street, hunching over, bumping into stuff. I can neither confirm nor deny that I actually have bumped into a lamppost while on my phone. That was a valuable lesson I learned on that day. Maybe I've been to the pub beforehand, but anyway, that's a different story. But the thing is that what the great thing about PCF is that it's actually a really simple framework. And I think that is the strength here, is that we've got in the PCF these very basic init, update, and notify and get outputs functions that have to be implemented by the PCF control. And then it's about just emitting HTML that can kind of sit inside the host. And then we've got this API that we can interact with. So the beauty of PCF is its simplicity. And so it's very unopinionated. I mean, that's what's interesting about it. And I think there was a question earlier about, can we have some guidance on best practice? And I think that, this is a good example of why that's kind of needed, because there is no opinion in the PCF. The framework is just like, well, we're just going to give you a property bag of some stuff. You give us back some HTML and let us know when something's changed. I mean, literally, it is that simple. And you can obviously use the API. So what I wanted to do is show a overview of the 3 different hosts and kind of pick out some of those differences, because although the framework is unopinionated and very simple, there are some things that you kind of need to be aware of and kind of watching out for, because again, this is progress over perfection. It's a journey. Things are changing, so especially because we're not in GA yet for Canvas and Portals. So I wanted to kind of just home in on and like spotlight, if you like, a few things that you kind of need to be aware of, especially if you want to start thinking about this ideal, right? The end game, which is we should be able to write a component that can work across all these different hosts. And so I'm going to look at them from these different aspects. There's a cool little video picture of some flashing lights. This was like design ideas in PowerPoint. Have you used design ideas? So you can create like the most boring bullet point in PowerPoint and open up the design ideas, and it comes up with like this, just this cool little image. This flashing lights. So I was like, yeah, I'll have some flashing lights. Put that in there. It's got nothing to do with the text, but anyway, yeah, I digress. So what if we go over and we just look at some kind of an example of a PCF, which what I wanted to do here. So okay, so let's look at the code that I'm going to use. If we go into trusty VS Code, dark mode all the way, love it. So I've got this is actually a component I built during the New York City user group. I actually kind of built it there and then, and it's just really simple. It's like a calculator thing, just trying to show some kind of fairly basic functionality. So if we just zoom in a little bit on this, so what this does is it kind of actually let's give it a little bit more space. What this does is it kind of gives you some let's go down here. My wrapping is not particularly good. Like I said, I built it during the NYC user group. So what we've got is a very simple component that's just allowing us to kind of click on this little calculator and enter some values. And so what you can do is you can change all these different values. That's going to really bug me there. Oh, look at that reflowing. And actually this is one of my points later on that I'll go into about reflowing. So if we just zoom out a little bit, there we go. So what we've got is a calculator here, which we can kind of do some amount. You can change either the amount after tax or you can change the tax amount. So it's kind of allows you to kind of change all the different things individually, and then you can accept that, and then it updates it on the form. So it's actually quite basic idea. But then if we look at the code, what we can do is see that a big focus point for when I'm writing code is trying to separate out the visuals from the logic. Now, when you're writing small components, it's not actually going to give you that much a big deal. But as you maintain it, as you develop it, it becomes really important. And this also allows you to then respond to changes in the framework. If you create your business logic separate to the way in which it's rendered and in the PCF framework, as the PCF framework changes over time, you can obviously evolve your rendering but keep your business logic the same. So especially with this being, a kind of journey. So what we've got is a simple, this is a class component, but equally you could use a function component. I'm using MobX to separate out all my business logic into this tax calculator view module. So I've just got a lot of observables, and it's very, very straightforward. It's just got some on change events and just calculates, the value after tax minus the value of it multiplied by the tax. That very straightforward kind of stuff. And then I've got some tests as well. It's like a very simple unit test. So if I type Jess on this, it's just going to check that my view model is actually doing what it should do. So if I refactor anything, it's going to make sure that code is still running. So it's actually a very simple control. It's using Fluent, React, and MobX for state management. I try to keep my actual React components fairly state-free, and most of it in the view model. And so you can see that, that's what it looks like in the model driven. So that's where you would normally see. That's if you've done model driven apps development, that's kind of common. And if you're using Fluent, you'll see that it looks the same as the rest of the host. I mean, that's the great thing about Fluent UI, is that everything is styled similar. If we now go over to what it looks like in a Canvas app, it's still pretty good. It's very similar. We've got some, the events and everything work. The styling, maybe it's going to be a little bit trickier. If you go over into portals, again, it looks pretty good. But what you can start to see in portals is a little bit more obvious, where the font is different, the layout of text boxes is different, because the reason being is that we in portals we're using Bootstrap to do all the styling here, whereas here this is using React. So you can start to see that in portals it's probably going to be more evident that the things are different. But debugging is pretty similar. Like in portals, you can load up your if you've done a build with your source maps. You'll be able to load up in this case, you can see my view model, and I can sort of put breakpoints on here, and so if I do there, it kind of breaks into my onAccept, and I can debug my logic there, which is great. Equally, I can do the same in my view model inside Canvas. So onAccept, there we go. It's going to break into there, and so actually the experience when you're developing it is going to be very similar, and so actually the majority of the challenges we have are not really with the code per se. We're not really with the PCF framework. So if we go back to here, if we start with we're going to start with looking at each of these features. Now, the key thing about this session is what I wanted to do is kind of highlight and spotlight these areas so you can keep an eye on it, because that's another image that was just given to me by PowerPoint. Great, cool. So I'm just so lazy using AI to do my slides now. Yeah, it's about focusing on these things and spotlighting and keeping an eye on them. So control types. The good news is that model-driven Canvas and portal apps is the field control works, and that's what that calculator was, is a field control. It looks, as you can see, I can debug it, and it looks okay across all of them. Those hosts, data sets, we don't have data sets in portals. Data sets in model-driven apps allow us to have multiple data set bindings, but in Canvas apps, it only allows us to have a single data set. Now, again, it's about watching the space. I'm not sure what the roadmap is here, but so if you are going to create like a component that works across all the different data set, all the different portals, really field is the only one you can do. Data sets is only going to work on Canvas and model-driven apps. And indeed, you'll have to only have a single data set if you want it to work in Canvas apps. In the manifest, there is this thing called property set. And actually what this does is it allows you to pick out a particular field in your data set to kind of nominate it as a special property that you can then read. So if you've got a load of data that's been bound to your data set, you can say, well, allow the maker to particularly select one of those fields in a data set and then use that as a named data set property set. Now that works really well in model-driven apps. So it gives me a drop down in the maker experience. In the Canvas apps, it's a little bit more tricky. You've got to provide this kind of expression. Obviously, in Portal apps, it's not there. There is also this. You can have property sets bound and also property set input. Input in model-driven apps, if you set it as an input, then you're going to have to type the logical name for the data set. So I wouldn't recommend using property sets with the input. Always use property set with bound. But if you're not using property set bounds, I highly recommend using it because it does make your component a lot more flexible. You know, you don't have to assume a particular set of fields in your data. If you're just doing model-driven apps, that may be something that is okay because you're always binding it to a particular entity. But if you want to make your components work across Canvas apps and with data sets, property sets are really essential to use. So I really highly recommend that. And this last, second to last one is really interesting because what you can have is you can have actually a data set component that has not only data set, but it also has standard field inputs. So a field control just binds to values on a form, and then a data set binds to a view in model-driven apps. So it's polarized in model-driven apps. You can either bind to a data set or bind to a field. That's just the way it works. In Canvas apps, if you make a data set component, what's interesting is you can bind to both fields and data sets, which is quite cool. And actually, for my drag and drop component, I use this. So I had not only the data set that you want to bind to the drag and drop component, but also some fields that you wanted to use for styling. You know, like, well, okay, well, what color do you want the text on your drag and drop item? You can't do that in model-driven apps. You can only bind to either the field or the field form component or a data set. So that's interesting, and perhaps some of these things we should use as questions for next time. Dataset paging. Okay, so if you've done any Canvas app datasets, you'll probably have found that it works a little bit differently. Looking forward to see what happens going forwards with GA. But in model-driven apps load the data incrementally, whereas Canvas apps you kind of more load up individual page of data. So it's one of those things you have to be aware of, but you can code around it, which is the great news. So I'm wary that we don't want to make this like death by PowerPoint, but like I said, it's difficult because we've got to kind of look at all of these different aspects, and I haven't got the time to go down to all the level of detail. So just hopefully this gives you enough to just focus your mind, so you might think about something when you're building an app down the line. So the maker experience then, model-driven apps, you have to use the classic experience. Well, it's one of those things. So if I go into my form, do I have my form somewhere here? I'm pretty sure I did, but maybe I've lost it now. So this is not there. Let me see. I thought I'd loaded it up, but I clearly hadn't loaded it up, and I've lost it now. So let's in the portal experience. If you're looking at the web page designer, it doesn't seem to load for some reason. So from a maker experience, you have to actually go and use the form designer that's part of the solution mechanism. So if I go up and open up my solutions, and let's just go and load up the form for the lead entity that I'm using, which is the contact us. So there we go. Let's go and load that entity. And so although I can get some degree of PCF functionality on the form, if I want to do any of the configuration, I actually have to go over and switch over to Classic at the moment. And again, this is one of those things that's going to gradually get better and better over time. So if we look at this is the lead form, and if I select this budget and a budget amount, you can see here that in the components, it's actually showing my calculator. It's getting my calculator component, but I can't actually change any of the components property bindings. I have to go over to the Classic to do that. And of course, with portals, The great thing about portals is one of the advantages of using portals over just like a custom ASP.NET web portal or something is that you can use the metadata of the form. So the idea is that you can just define your PCF component inside your form in your Dataverse form, and then just use that in portals, and then it will just use that component and render it. There is a little bit extra stuff you got to do in your portal on your form definition. You do have to go and add this little bit of metadata. You also have to enable access to web resources, but that's all in the docs. But you need to basically define it as a code component, to say, you give it the form and the attribute name, and then you say, right, for budget now we're going to use a code component, and then it renders it and picks it up. So a little bit trickier with form, but I do believe that's going to get better. So actually, the thing that really wins out with the wins out with PCF is the maker experience for Canvas apps. And I don't know if you saw Hemant's keynote, but I think he showed a screenshot of the improvements that are going to happen in this area. So, okay, budget amount. Okay, this is our PCF here. You can see it's our PCF which we've imported, so I've got it in my added in my components, and that's what I really love about the fact that PCF, it just kind of loads in there for the maker to use. I just import my component, and then boom, it just looks like other things that I've got in my drag and drop library. So the maker experience is just awesome for PCF. The properties is a blank page, and I think this is what Hemant showed, is it's looking a little bit better. At the moment, you've got to go to advanced, and you've got to select, you've got to define all your various different events there. But you can see here on change, I just then need to go and pick up the on change of my amount after tax, and here I'm just setting a var amount, and so okay, it's on one hand it gets given, and the other hand it gets taken away. Model driven for makers, you just bind it to a field, and it's all metadata driven. In Canvas, although it's got a fantastic drag and drop, draggy drop clicky, draggy droppy clicky clicky kind of stuff, it's you do have to worry about managing the on change events, but actually that's part of the power, if you like, of Canvas, which is pretty cool. So and that you can build in Canvas. You can have you can have apps for mobile and tablet. They work fine. PCF works across the board, and indeed in portals, it works fine in mobile and tablet apps as well, which is great. So yeah, the Canvas app panel experience is coming. It's going to be one of those things that I'm really looking forward to. So type aware, this is an interesting one, because when you add a PCF component to a model-driven app, you actually have to about it knows what type you are binding it to. So if you've defined in your manifest that it's going for a specific string, it's only going to let it bind it to a string. With Canvas apps, you don't get that kind of level of type safety. It's down to the maker to do all the conversions. So that's one thing to think about when you're doing you're creating your Canvas app PCFs, making sure that the maker is aware of what types you are supporting. Interestingly, you can't have the same field on a form multiple times in portals, which is just a little side note. I won't dwell on that too much. So features. Okay, I'm not going to go down and get dirty with this, but this is one of those places that I hope that the docs are going to improve over time. Is that you can see down the left-hand side that green ticks. PCF is built for model. The API is it kind of has its roots in model apps, so naturally a lot of the API is just going to work in model. Some of the things just don't make sense from a Canvas or even from a portal, like navigation, opening up records, having a lookup dialog to select different items. Certain metadata about it doesn't make sense from a Canvas. Maybe from a portals it does. User settings, the portal really, it doesn't have the same kind of concept of the user as a model-driven apps, and certainly in Canvas apps, the user settings don't have the same kind of implied linkage to the user in Dataverse. So naturally, this is probably where the biggest focus point is going to be for you in terms of making sure that you understand what features you need from the API and which of those features are going to be very specifically linked to the host that it's at. So, I tend to think about it in like, okay, well, we've got a user interface. How do we make that work? And then secondly, well, what demands do I have in terms of interacting with the API? And then what you can do is you can sort of detect whether or not that's available depending on the host. And you can say, well, fall back and use a different. But, this is probably the biggest area that's tricky. But also, I think it's a focus area for the team. And I think this is one of these places you really need to take a look at and keep an eye on. So responsiveness, this is quite, again, one of those tricky areas. So forms, the actual font sizes are quite tricky to manage. They're really good with model-driven apps, especially if you use Fluent UI. They're very Fluent UI. They're consistent. Portals, it's okay. Canvas apps, less so. You tend to find that your PCF component's sometimes a bit too big or a bit too small. So definitely test it in multiple aspect ratios, different scaling of your apps. Reflow works brilliantly in model-driven apps and portals. In Canvas apps, there isn't really that kind of notion of reflow because, if you go into the app, you give it a particular space that. So if I this has got a space for this control based on the size of the control. So if I was going to do some reflow, I'd actually have to dynamically resize this, and then inside in my component, I then have to respond to the changes in the size and then change the size of my component accordingly. In a model-driven app, it just kind of works nicely because, again, you can see it. I hadn't particularly done some wrapping control very well here, but you can see here that the rest of the stuff just reflows around it, which is pretty cool. And then equally inside portals, it does the same kind of thing because, again, it's just using the HTML, CSS type reflows. So the layout changes, you get that as an event that you can given in model-driven apps, and so when the available size changes, when you're resizing the browser even, you actually get layout changes. Canvas apps, you get told about the resize if the Canvas app changes the size of the control. So, and if you've ever built any responsive apps in Canvas apps, you'll have to kind of dynamically set the width and height and things like that. The component will get told when that happens, which is cool. Portals, not so at the moment. So you don't actually get told about any layout. You get told when it's first rendered, and here's your layout, and you don't even get any kind of width type stuff. And in portal apps, it only tells you that it's the desktop. It doesn't tell you it's a web or a tablet or a phone. But it does in model and Canvas apps. So, again, it's watch this space. So you don't get allocated width and height in portal. So I just showed you an example of that, which is cool. The reflowing, I just, it's more, I think, about, testing it and thinking about upfront. I think then that would be my advice on all this kind of stuff. Is like upfront, think about what kind of reflow. Do you ever need a situation where actually you're not going to have enough space? Do you want your control to be supported on a phone? And actually there was a question about the editable grid, and the classic example, making it touch friendly, width friendly, all those kind of things. Sometimes you might have to have it rendering a completely different UI. I don't know if you've seen the grids, the out of the box grids in model driven apps. When you shrink them down, they change to a sort of like a card layout rather than a tabular layout. So, it's one of those things to think about up front, because it's going to be non-trivial. Theming is a work in progress, right? So theming isn't really there at the moment. The great thing about portals actually is because you've got Bootstrap CSS that you can change easily. You can just easily use those CSS, that CSS in your Canvas app. But of course, that's not, in your PCF. But that's not going to make it easy to create a single component that works across all different devices. If you're using Fluent UI, interestingly, you get blue icons in model-driven apps. In Canvas apps, you get purple icons. So, hey, great, which is great. So, and breathe. So I put this slide in just, because I didn't want to do death by PowerPoint. But, a lot of things to cover. So we're going to just take a little bit of a shift here. So versioning in ALM. This is an interesting one. So solution dependencies is a very interesting concept, because when you are creating your Canvas app, what happens is that when you add your component, what it does is it imports that PCF component into your Canvas app from your solution. And then if you publish a new version of your Canvas app, of your PCF, the next time you open it up in the editor, it's going to say there's a new version. Do you want to upgrade? And the reason for this is that actually what it's doing is it's storing a PCF version of your PCF inside the bundled app, right? So it's not using the bundle that's inside the actual Dataverse solution. It's storing a copy. And actually, if you use the Power App Solution Packager, which is it's an experimental, if you unpack it, you will see the bundle. You'll see your JavaScript from your PCF inside that Canvas app. So if you publish a new version of your control in your solution, it's not going to update inside your Canvas app. You'd actually have to go and open up your Canvas app in Studio and republish a new version with the upgraded. So it's something to be aware of. And I know that it was talked earlier about that's something that the team are working on in terms of solution dependencies, which is like music to my ears, because it does cause a challenge. So debugging then. So the test harness is okay. It's okay. You can do basics. You can check. I mean, for this component, it's actually quite. You can debug it, and so I can change my data inputs, and it responds. So you can do basic stuff. But do be aware that in the test harness, there are a lot of things that really do work differently depending on the different hosts. So. It's interesting because, in a sense, if you want to start making a component that works across all hosts, actually, making it work in the test harness is kind of quite advantageous to doing that, because the test harness kind of strips away all of the specifics, all these different hosts, and gets you down to bare metal. So I'm kind of starting to change my opinion of test harness with the ethos of trying to make components working across all different devices. But there are things that, for example, you can't use the web API. You can't talk directly to the XRM web API in model-driven apps. But you know what? You can't do that in Canvas apps at the moment or Portal at the moment. So actually, it's a good test as whether or not your component is going to work across all different hosts. You do need to refresh your model-driven app if you are using something like Fiddler. So the reason being is, so what I've got here is if we open up Fiddler, if you don't do this already, this is a fantastic way of debugging your PCF controls, because what I've got here is I've got a Fiddler expression here, which is fairly complex. But this one regular expression works for both portals, both Canvas and Model, which means that I can go into my code and I can do an npm start watch, and I can make a change to my code. So if I go into my calculator TSS here, and I'm just going to go, I don't know, go and output something like foo. There we go. Save that way, and then that's going to rebuild my component. And what it means is that inside my model-driven app, I can go and just simply refresh my form here, and then it will pick up the latest version of that component eventually. It will need to finish the rebuilding. But equally in here, I can do a refresh, and it will just go and pick up the latest version of the component. But in Power Apps and Canvas apps, you actually have to close the app and then reopen it, because it does do this kind of like it does actually load it up and sort of cache it in that session. So you can see there it's got the food. And equally, if I do a refresh there, if my caching is all, I have to do a control F5 to reload it, and then it's just going to simply pick up the latest version. So you do have to be wary about that if you are doing Canvas apps. So you can see it's got foo there, that you will need to close it and reopen it, which is a bit tricky. So maybe that'll be something that gets better over time. And so, and the reason being that it's a little bit tricky with Fiddler and Canvas app is that actually what happens is that when you load, you've got your PCF inside Dataverse and Power Apps there. It's got bundle.js. Actually, in powerapps.com in the Maker Studio, it goes and stores it in blob storage. Okay. And so when you kind of takes a copy of that bundle.js, pops it into blob storage, and then when you're running it in Maker or Player, you get it loaded from a slightly different endpoint. So you have to make your autoresponder pick it up from a different location. And so, but also, I've got a blog post about this. So you also have to add in access control origin, because of course what you've got here is you've got Fiddler intercepting this, and it's going across 2 different domains, and so it needs to be marked as safe. Unfortunately, with the portals has actually published your PCF bundle under this _PCF web resource GUID. So it's doesn't have the same kind of bundle.js control name format. So if we go into our Fiddler, you can see here I've got a different I've got to have a different rule for my portal development. And it doesn't even have the control name. It's just like got the GUID, and actually that's the GUID of the web resource. Even though you can't see your bundle.js as a web resource, it's part of the control. It's actually under the covers. It is actually a web resource, rather ironically, seeing as though it's been replacing web resources. But yeah, so you'll have to have a slightly different a rule to pick them up. But not some significant problem. So, that's I've trying to get through and just give you those kind of high-level top ticks. So I've got a summary here of those kind of points to keep an eye on. And again, progress over perfection. This is a journey. We're seeing a lot of these things get better over time. Model-driven, it's everything is stable as a rock. I've been using it for couple of years now. Really everything works brilliantly, and no surprise really, because it's the first party apps are using it or has been using it for a long time. Canvas apps, I think we're probably going to see a little bit more changes over time. But the great thing is the PCF framework, like I said, is so elegant. It's so simple that actually if you create your business logic and separate it out from the way in which it's rendered, then actually the only thing you're really going to need to evolve over time is that front end. If you're using React, it'll be the TSX stuff, and you can keep the rest of your logic nicely in cat. And so from a refactoring, it should be a lot easier. So yeah, watch this space. There's a whole load of resources there. If you want to watch me build that calculator PCF, there's a YouTube there from the New York City user group that you can go and see how I did that. The channel 9, where I showed the Canvas app PCF, which has got a link to the code in that as well. There's the code for some of the stuff that I did with that calculator in that link. If you go to the Microsoft Learn, there's some great stuff there. Benedict's got a PCF guide there. I've got a course. A lot of these resources have been mentioned already in some of the really fantastic sessions earlier in this day. So yeah, so thank you. I hope that hasn't completely sent you to sleep. I've not heard anyone snoring. It's a lot of things, but hopefully I try to get a bit of a balance in terms of highlighting stuff, but not giving you too much to be confusing. If you do want to ask me any questions, and I think there are a few questions that we can maybe address in the next few minutes. But if you do want to reach me on Twitter at Durow, or I've got a YouTube channel as well, do feel to just reach out to me and ask questions, or on LinkedIn indeed as well. So thank you. Any questions we can go through now if you'd like.
Yeah, there are a few questions. So one question is from Victor, and he says, probably a noob question, but he still wants to get it out, as can I make custom icons for PCF components in Maker portal?
Can you make custom icons for PCF in the Maker portal? Okay, so what are we talking about here? Are we talking about custom icons to show it in the Maker experience in Studio? Is that Victor? Is that what you're talking about? If I still got it open, this down here, this one here. Is that what the question is?
I think so. He just wants to use no code, low code experience, I believe, with PCF components, which I don't think so is the idea or is the intention of PCF.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of the things that PCF is really good at is dividing up the concerns within a component-based architecture. So, if you create something and you code it up, you should be able to then consume that by your makers. And yeah, I think if we could have the ability to create a custom icon here, that would be awesome. I mean, I've not seen that possibility, but that would be really, really cool, because then in a sense what we're doing then is we're becoming a lot closer to the first party components.
Right.
And I think, you know, when I think we were talking earlier in the previous session about the source being available for the Fluent UI Canvas components maybe being available, I would expect that the Fluent UI Canvas components will have their own icons, and so maybe, fingers crossed, we'll be able to do our own icons as well. But certainly all these things help, and the screenshot that Hemant showed about with having a custom property panel with, you know, it's the labels laid out nicely. One of the challenges at the moment is that you get this amount after tax. You can see that's the logical name. That's not actually the display name. But what we want to have is a localized display name in that properties panel. So all these kind of things, I really hope that there's going to be investment so that when the maker then picks it up, they don't see any real difference between the code components. It's almost like actually code components. I'd rather just not even see it under code components, be able to give it our own group as well. You know, define it. Is it an input component? Is it a layout component? Is it a display component? You know, be able to just slide it in there surreptitiously alongside the first party stuff.
Yeah, and in model-driven app, we can add the preview image, which is really helpful. So I don't see at some point like this should be native, putting the custom icons on the code components, which will make sense. So
yeah, so I think that Bhutu was just talking, where is the calculator image icon created? So this icon here, this is actually a Fluent UI image. So if I go to Fluent UI, one of the great things about using Fluent UI is that it has a fantastic icon library. So if I go to styles and we go into these styles here, you can go into iconography, and so if we do go down here, we can actually do a search. So I can search for calculator, for example. That's the icon I was using. So I tend to find that actually using Fluent, it's like one of those kind of best practices, if you like. I sort of say, well, you know, if I can possibly do it, use a Fluent UI icon, because those icons will be part of the framework that are available for us eventually when we get virtual controls. Certainly, yeah, you could just go and create your own component with its own icon, you know, and that's fine. But if you can at all use it, I always recommend using the Fluent UI's icon set.
Yeah. The next question is from Devi and Cole Phillips. Philip Cole, is there any difference in offline support within PCF control in different hosts?
Offline support, yeah, absolutely. So offline support is one of those things that I have really not had much success with PCF. So I can certainly, simply because of the way in which offline works, right? With Power Apps, really offline, with Canvas apps, offline is just left to you in terms of, you know, you have to go and create the offline data set and supply it. So, you know, that's less of an issue. With model-driven apps, it's done all for you before you behind the scenes. So it's a very different approach. But I think the ethos here is that it should just work. Okay, so if it works in the hosts, as long as you're not using something specifically to do with the offline functionality of that host, it should just work. That's the ethos as I understand it. And so your component really shouldn't have to, unless it's like calling the web API, for example, in model-driven apps, you're obviously going to need to know that offline isn't supported there with the web API. But I think if you're looking at, and this is what this session is concentrating on, if you're looking at trying to create a component that works across all different hosts, it really shouldn't have to necessarily worry about whether or not it's online or offline, because you're using the framework to actually deal with that without you having to worry about it.
Yeah, and I think so that actually flows into the next question from Mayank Kumar, where he says that, like, until all these three areas become consistent in terms of what they offer, should we be building 3 different controls to ensure it renders correctly on those 3 different devices or platforms?
Yeah, that's certainly my approach at the moment. Yes, just simply because I find it's easier to manage the code base, unless it's something that's just so simple that it's just displaying a very straightforward visualization that has no complexity behind it, like a slider control. But even then, with the theming, that can cause challenges. But yeah, my approach at the moment is to maintain separate code bases, but where I can share the common logic, the view model, so between the different hosts, because if that's the reason it separates out the user interface from the actual logic behind it.
Right, but then 3 different controls, but the view model would actually run the logic behind it.
Yeah,
and then the
exactly.
UI you would control from your PCF.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah, I think so. That's a good strategy to go with. And then Davey has a question. Is it fair to say that if my app required to add some features to the PCF that are not supported in Canvas app, better choose model app to design and implement the app?
That's an interesting one, actually. I mean, and it probably is broader than PCF, right? Because picking which app that you want to use at the moment obviously is limited in the sense that the convergence story we haven't got that far down it. But I think going forwards, as Canvas converges with model, with the custom pages, then actually there will be less of a need to pick model or Canvas. It's more about you can get best of both worlds. But I don't know if I would use PCF as the deciding point whether or not to use model and Canvas, simply because there are so many other differences between Canvas and model that would educate that decision. So PCF might be just one of those, but there are many others, like the odd difference in offline, like we were just talking about, like the metadata driven forms, the mobile app experience, the pixel perfect UI, all of these other different factors. I think you have to consider them all. But certainly going forwards with the convergence, I think that those the need to pick will go away gradually.
Yeah. And I think so also the connectors, like what data sources are you driving the data from? Is it just the Dataverse, or is it SharePoint, or any other things would also drive your decision to choose what app you want to go with? And there are, like, as Scott said, there would be like hundreds of other things that you have to consider before making that choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Connectors is another great one, and that's actually what I'm really excited about with the convergence with the custom pages, is that ability then to just sort of bring in the connector ecosystem into your model-driven apps. And so you can, I mean, to a certain extent, we can already do that with embedding Canvas apps inside model-driven apps, but by having these kind of real the native integration with the custom pages, so you got that integration with the navigation back and forwards and the sitemap. Also, it just becomes a lot more seamless. It means that we can now a lot closer to be able to use those custom connectors and other connectors to other data sources inside our model-driven apps. But yeah, absolutely, so many different things to consider. Someone needs to just write a table and just these are all the differences. I'll nominate you. I nominate you, Ganesh.
Yeah, you already did it for PCF, so I'm gonna refer that for now. And that's it.
I did a little bit of PCF. I could spend a lot longer talking about this, trying to squeeze it into 1 hour. Goodness me.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time. So if you have any questions, or if you want to connect to Scott, do you mind sharing your details again in the chat as well as on the screen, so people can see? If you want to connect with Scott, that's the Twitter handle, and he has tons of content on his YouTube channel. Also, don't forget he has a course on PCF for model-driven apps. So do get enrolled if you want to learn about PCF for model-driven apps. So thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been fantastic. And just amazing content today. Just, I felt thing at the end of it all is, it's like, oh no, how can I possibly follow all of that awesome stuff?
Well, you always do, right? Now, it's a hard part after following your session. After your session, it's my session, and now I have to be on your level, and it's going to be hard. So let's see how I would do.
You do great.
Well, thank you, Scott, for presenting the session and answering all the questions that came across. Okay, so we are actually above the top of the hour. So let's get started with the next session. That's mine. And I am going to start sharing my screen here.
Hey, Dinesh, before you transition, I don't know if Diana is here. Diana, you want to maybe put your camera up for a second if you can, of course. I don't know if you had a chance to do it before, but I really would like to thank you both for putting this event together, not only doing the organization, but also presenting at this level. It's really great to be able to collaborate and just walk in this career path and learn from both of you, not only the technology part, but the human side, collaborating and making sure that the community is well served. I really appreciate all you do for the community. Thank you so much. And I don't want to steal any more time of your presentation. I just wanted to make sure we voice our gratitude for all the work that you both do for all of us. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Victor,
Thank you
for your kind words. Okay, so let me share my screen to get started.
I think I'm gonna stop the recording and start again.
Stop the recording and yeah. You wanna do that, Diana?
Yes, I do it. Just a second.